Hey everybody, hope you're doing well. So this video is going to be about part writing off of Roman numerals. Now that we know exactly what's going to be tested on the AP exam, means that we can focus on exactly that. And so one of the free response questions is going to be part writing on figured bass, and the other is part writing, well, same question, just two examples. The other is part writing off of Roman numerals. So we've already covered the realizing the figured bass part writing, so we're moving on now to the part writing off of Roman numerals. I would say if you haven't seen the video that I made about the part writing from a major example and minor example from realizing figured bass, to watch that first. And also, if you haven't seen my video that I made on part writing rules, watch all those first and then come here. I think I'm probably going to move a little faster in this video because I'm assuming that you've already seen those three. So let's get to it. So what you have here is grand staff, a couple of bars. This is a short example. I have a small dry erase board. We are in A major, and they set you up with that key. They tell you what it is, so 3 sharps. And they give you a list of Roman numerals with inversion symbols. So we have a 1, 5, 6, a 1, major 4, 6, 1, 6, 4, 5, 7 to a 1. I did forget to write the time signature. We're in 4, 4 time. Sorry, that's a little sloppy, but you get the idea. All right, so our steps that we are going to follow here are first, and I'll put these steps in the description below. First, you're going to realize the chords, similar to how you realized a figured bass. Now you're realizing the chords. Okay, so underneath these chords, you'll go through and write, these chords out. So we're in A major. A major 1 is spelled A, C sharp, E. And I'm stacking them vertically with the root being, well, in this one the root was the lowest sound. I'm going to write all of the roots because it's easier to write chords that way. I'm going to write all the roots on the bottom, but I'll show you what to do for the bass notes here in a moment. 5, 6, so that's built off scale degree 5, which is E. It's a major chord, E, G sharp, B. Now, this is an inversion, right? And so here in this first chord, your bass note has got to be A. Here, the bass note is different than the root, right? So this is the third of the chord, the G sharp being your bass note. What I want you to do, and you can do steps, this is technically step 2, but you can do step 1 and step 2 at the same time, and that is to circle your bass notes. So circle the A in the first chord, circle the G sharp in the second chord, and we're going to continue to do the same thing. Back to a 1 chord, A, C sharp, E, and your bass note circled is the A. A 4, 6 major, so you're working off scale degree 4, A, B, C sharp, D, right? So a major chord built on D, F sharp, A. But of course the root is D, the bass note is going to be, again, the third of the chord, which is the F sharp. Now we're moving to a 1, 6, 4. Don't worry about the inversion yet, just write A, C sharp, E. It's a second inversion chord, so your bass note is going to be an E. A 5, 7 is spelled E, G sharp, B, D. Okay? And the bass note is the root, which is E, and then you're resolving to an A, C sharp, E, with A being your bass note. So now you've realized the chords, and you have circled all of the bass notes that you're going to have to write in. Before writing the bass part, go ahead, and like we did, and I'm going to try to use a different color. Let's use blue. Like we did in previous examples, go ahead and draw arrows for your tendency tones and how they're going to resolve. So tendency tones and resolution tones. These are between the dominant chords, right, the 5 or the 7 diminished, to a tonic chord. So they would be here between 5 and 1, your tendency tone is scale degree 7 and the 7th of a 7th chord, always. So this G sharp, which is your bass note, is going to resolve to the A. So I'm going to draw, I don't know if you'll be able to see that well, but you're going to draw that to the A. Which all of that is in the bass, right? So that happens to be the bass notes. This is tonic, predominant, kind of sub or predominant here. But here we have dominant to tonic, so we're going to have some tendency tones, and we have 2 of them because it's a 5/7 chord. Again, we have this G sharp, like before, that's resolving to A. So whatever voice you write the G sharp in, it needs to resolve to A. And the 7th of the 7th chord resolves down in a major key, a half step. So we have E, G sharp, B, D. The D is the 7th of the 7th chord. Will resolve down to C sharp between the penultimate chord and the final chord. Okay, so that is steps 1, 2, and 3. Now, your next step is to start writing on the grand staff. First, you're going to write a bass line, and you're going to use the notes that you have circled here, following any tendency tones that you may have arrows pointed to. Now, if you'll remember, before you start just slapping notes up here, think about the range of these voices, right? So in the soprano, you're dealing with C, middle C, up to G. You can occasionally hit an A, right? So the alto is the G below the staff up to the C here. The tenor is going to be, where are we? The C here up to G above the staff. And then the bass is this bottom line G up to like a middle C. So our first note is A. So we've got 2 possibilities. We could write it here on the top line or here on the bottom space. Knowing that we're going to have to use G sharp and possibly F sharp, I think I'm going to start up at the top of the staff, only because I could get A, G sharp, A, and that's fine. But I need, in the next chord, to get F sharp, I would have to jump way up. It's not terrible for the bass to be jumpy, but it'll be a little smoother and probably will create less voice part writing problems if I keep it just a tiny bit smoother. So I'm going to write it up here. So we have 4 quarter notes. Obviously we have 3 chords in the last measure of 4/4 times, so something's going to have to be a longer duration than a quarter. I always suggest making the last chord the longer duration. So 4 quarter notes and then 2 quarter notes with a half note to finish that out. So let's write our A. We're going to draw that here, draw it nice and neat, and do the stem down for the bass, always. Now we need a G sharp, use the one right below it. Since we're in a major key, that G sharp is covered in the key signature, so you don't have to write any accidentals here. It's a tendency tone that resolves back to A, and I'm just following our circled notes. Back to your home note. Now here's our next chord, this major 4/6. We need that F sharp. I'm going to get it here. It's the next line down. Now we have the circled note, right, because this is the second inversion triad. The E, which is right below the F sharp. And this is a quarter note. Another E, the root of this 5/7 chord. Keep it on the same note. And then we're going to a 1. Now here, you could do one of 2 things. You can jump back to the top note, which is where you started. You know, that creates a nice smooth line. Or you could drop down an octave. Now knowing this is the last note and that bottom A is, you know, in the range, it would be fun. Why don't we do that? Just to be a little different. So that bottom A, half note with the stem drawn down. Okay, so now that's step 4. Step 5, and this is the last step, is to continue to part write all of the other voices, making the soprano the melody, just as you did back when you were part writing from realizing a figured bass. Because essentially now, that's what you have. You've created now a figured bass with the chords. You've realized those chords, and now you're part writing. So the process now is still the same as it was before. As in the past, when we wrote a note, we struck through it. So I'm going to strike through all of our circled notes because those are our bass notes. Now that's not saying that you cannot use those notes again, right? Because a lot of these chords are triads and you have 4 voices and you're going to have to double a note. And the root, especially if the bass is the root is your first choice to double. But that just says when you're looking at your other voices, you've got that covered. You have a place to start. You see the notes that remain left in the chord. So the next step is to write the soprano, which is the melody. You're going to write it contrary motion, if possible, at all possible, to the bass line. So the bass line starts up in the upper part of the range and kind of takes a dip to mid-range and then there. So I think, it might be smart, of course, to do the soprano opposite that. So maybe don't start so high since the bass started high. Maybe start a little lower, right? Maybe on the A or the C sharp and work kind of up, right? And see if you can get it to go opposite direction. So why don't we double the root, right? We could do the C sharp, but doubling the root is the strongest doubling for a triad. You would want to double the 5th as your next option and the 3rd of the chord, which in that chord would be the C sharp, only with good reason. So I didn't have good reason, so that's why we're using the A. Stems up. Okay, so you've got an A, you doubled the root. Here we need an E and a B, and the bass line goes down, so let's contrary motion make the soprano go up to B. Stem up. You can cross through this B. Here we return to the first chord. We need a C sharp or an E. Now we did, here we doubled the A. One possibility is to come back to the A. Another possibility is you could go up, continue moving up to the C sharp. Even though that would be similar motion, the G sharp to A, B to C sharp, it's not parallel octaves and it's not parallel fifths. So this could be however you like it. I think actually just to follow my own kind of rules for good part writing, I'm going to return back to the home note to make it contrary motion, but the C sharp would also be fine. But the more contrary motion you write, the less you have to double check yourself with part writing rules. So there we doubled the A. So now we have a skip, right? It's not stepwise, a skip downward in the bass. So a skip upward in the soprano or the melody would be kind of warranted here. So obviously, you could get the A, but you're already on an A. That would be oblique motion with one line staying the same, the other moving. I prefer that to happen in the alto and tenor voices. We want to make this part interesting. I don't want to double the F sharp, so why don't we grab the D? Now that is a skip, right? That looks like a long skip on the page, and it is. But look at the interval. It would be easy to sing that interval. It's a perfect fourth, right? A to D. So it's not some oddball interval. And keep in mind that your melody can and essentially should be a little bit jumpy, right? That jumpiness makes melodies memorable. So don't be afraid of a perfect fourth or even a perfect fifth. I don't know that I would put huge skips above that, and I would try to keep it to a fourth if you can. So this one will work fine. So we've got the D, let's mark that out. Now, this is, before we write our notes, this is the most famous, and according to the AP people anyway, ending for this part writing. They love to write 1-6-4, 5, or 5-7 to 1. And I don't know if you can remember back to the previous videos, whenever you see this ending, your melody should be scale degrees 3, 2, 1. Make that happen. That is what they want to see. Their eyes are going to light up with joy when they see that. So, if we can write scale degrees 3, 2, 1, then that's what we're going to do. We're on scale degree 4, so writing the next note down would be the C sharp. Now, in order to do that, I had to kind of break a little, contrary motion rule, right? We had F sharp down to E, D down to C sharp. But we don't have parallel fifths, right? And we don't have parallel octaves, so we're okay. So don't panic on that. Stems up on the soprano. Mark out your C sharp. The next note, scale degree 2, is your B. And here we have oblique motion, so you don't have to worry about part writing rules. Mark your B out. And then your last note being scale degree 1, which is doubling the root, which is the A. Please make sure you write the right durations. Don't write a half note in the bass and then a quarter note in the soprano. Make the durations match. And we've doubled the root, which is, strengthening that chord. Okay, now the final step is to write your alto and your tenor at the same time. And make them as boring as possible, make them as static as possible. In other words, if you don't have to move them and they don't have to jump and skip around and leap, don't do it. So, here in the first chord, we've only doubled the A. We need C sharp and we need E. The tenor certainly could get the C sharp. The tenor could also get the E. That is in the range. But if you put the tenor on the E, then the trouble is that the only other note left would be to double that E. You cannot write the tenor on E and the alto on C sharp because then you have what's called overlap. It doesn't look like it on the staff, but your tenor note would be above, singing the note above the alto, and that's a big no-no. So, the only way it can be is a C sharp with the stem up in the tenor, and an E with the stem down in the alto. Boom, boom, that chord's checked off. Now, the only note that we had to have absolutely in this next chord was an E, which was the root of the chord. You've already got that in your alto, and so unless you have good reason to move it, I would just leave it. Now here, this C sharp has to change, right? So it could go down to the B. That's a possibility. That's doubling the fifth of the chord, though. And when you double the fifth of a chord, you start to change its function. So unless it's a 1-6-4 chord, I do not suggest doubling the fifth. So it's got to go somewhere, right? I'm not going to make it double the bass. That's just an odd jump. So here, actually, I would have the alto and the tenor note sing the same note, which means that you would write the E 2 ledger lines above the top of the staff and do the stem up. They are singing the same pitch, but what you've done is you've doubled the root, which strengthens that chord, and that's perfectly fine. Okay, going to the next chord, we need a C sharp and an E. You could, I would leave the alto where it is. It hasn't moved yet, and unless it has to, I would just leave it. So we've got an E. I would return the tenor back to its original position of C sharp. So, right there. Now, just to be aware and careful, at first I thought I was going to have parallel fifths, right? This is an E, this is a B in the soprano. Now, if I had moved E to B, which is a perfect fifth, down, the soprano moves down one step. But had I moved that down to a D and an A, I absolutely would have had parallel fifths. But what I have here is a perfect fifth moving to a sixth, and so we're okay. So just so that you're aware of that, be looking. So we're covered here. We're doing great. Okay, in this next chord, the only note that we had to have was an A. We have to be start to be a little aware because we moved the soprano so far up here, the alto, we could write another E, right, if we don't need one, but we could write it in that range, but we need to keep an octave between the melody, which is the soprano, and the alto. So we don't want to drop the alto down anymore at all. Let's see, here we've got an F sharp already in the bass. We've got the root in the soprano. I think what would Mr. McCaskill do? If we moved the tenor note to the D, which would be the root of that chord, you're doubling the root between tenor and soprano, which strengthens that chord. And then, you've got some options here. One option is that you could write an A in the alto. Now, you're coming close to what's called overlap, right? The soprano was an A in the last previous chord. You would not want to write the alto above that A in this chord. Writing the same note is acceptable. It's a little jumpier than I like in an alto line, but looking at it, I cannot see that we're breaking any part writing rules. Another option is that you could double the third right there on F sharp. My rule on doubling thirds is only if you have to. And between the A and this F sharp, I don't have to double that F sharp. So to follow my own rules, I'm going to write the A. I hope all that makes sense. So we're doubling, we've got two roots, a third, and a fifth. Okay, great. Now all we need in this next chord is an A. Your alto is already on it, so let's leave them there. And then that chord is taken care of. Of course, you have to double a note. So we've got A, C sharp, and E, only doubling the C sharp if we have to. So primarily it'd be great to double the A, or in a 1-6-4 chord. To double the fifth works okay. You are changing the function, but this 1-6-4 chord does not function as a tonic chord. So doubling the E, I think, works really well here. It's only one note away, one note up for the tenor, and you double that E, and that strengthens that 1-6-4 chord. We're getting close. We're almost there. Now, we need a G sharp, and we need a D. So wherever your G sharp is has to resolve to A, or should resolve to A. And we get to that in just a moment. I'm going to show you an exception to the rule. It makes more logical sense and static sense to keep the alto and tenor not jumpy, to simply put the D there in the tenor, which is a resolution tone to C sharp. Half note C sharp, right? So you're covered there and there. Which means the alto note needs to be G sharp. Okay, so here's part of the trouble. Because the soprano went 3-2-1, and the alto note is here on scale degree 7, which is the tendency tone, resolution tone to A, they technically should share the last note. Now that creates three roots, A, and a third, which is okay. If you had to leave a note out, the fifth is the note to leave out. I try my best, if I'm going to leave the fifth out, to have two roots and 2/3. Not usually three roots and only 1/3. So this is the only time, and I hesitate in even telling you about it because I don't want to confuse you, but this is the only time that I would break a tendency resolution tone rule, is if you had three roots and a third. If by writing a different note in the alto part meant that you could have a full chord or either two roots or 2/3, then use that way. The AP people are okay with this, but only do this with good reason, and I think we have it here. So we got a G sharp in the alto. It should resolve to A, and the only note that you would take it to is scale degree 7, which is G sharp, to this E. That was the ugliest E I've ever drawn in my life, but you see it, it's there. And again, don't go G sharp up to a C sharp. You would go scale degree 7 down to 5. Again, I know that breaks a little resolution tendency tone rule. You'll just have to take my word for it. The AP people are cool with it. They'll know what you did. They'll know why you did it to avoid having 3 roots and a third, and they will give you the okay on it. So here it is. This is part writing in a major key from Roman Numerals. I hope this has been helpful. My next video really soon, here maybe later today or tomorrow, is going to be part writing from Roman Numerals in a minor key. So stay tuned for that. Be good, y'all, and we'll see you soon on the next video. Take care. Peace.